I'm Bruce Karasik, co-founder of the Jewish Republican Alliance. Thank you for joining us. We're so happy to have Barak Lurie here with us today. We'll be speaking with Barak in just a few minutes, but first, yesterday was January 6th, just 1 year since the day of when a group of protesters thought it was their duty to unlawfully march into the Capitol building, trespass, vandalize our central place of government. And for the record, I condemn those actions fully and without reservation, but I fully support the right of Americans to peacefully protest, march, and hold rallies. But there's no place in our country for a large group of protesters to enter our Capitol building without authorization or permission. I think we can agree on that. But having said that, there's no question in my mind that the January 6th incident was not a planned insurrection or any insurrection at all. President Trump, in his speech that day, said, and I quote, "I know that everyone here will soon be marching over to the Capitol building to peacefully and patriotically make your voices heard." And this past summer, Reuters reported that the FBI hasn't found any evidence that the January 6th assault on the US Capitol was part of an organized plan to overturn the election results, and they cited law enforcement officials. And those officials also said that so far, no evidence that the former president, Donald Trump, or people directly around him were involved in organizing what happened. But the baseless chants of insurrection and sedition are still being made by Democrats and political opportunists. But so much negativity and divisiveness, loneliness, and despair has hovered over America since Joe Biden has been sworn in as president. President Trump just recently commented on the events of the past year, and he said our country no longer has borders, has totally and completely lost control of COVID, is no longer energy independent, inflation is rampant, our military is in chaos, and our exit or surrender strategy in Afghanistan was perhaps the most embarrassing day in the long and distinguished history in the United States, and much, much more. Many Americans no longer even trust our government or our media. And those who present themselves as journalists and reporters are now routinely inserting their views and political bias into a story, or in many cases, not even bothering to report an important story. There are those who have stooped so low to deliberately edit someone's words or omit portions of a quote to distort the intended meaning that the person had, and then use that distorted quote to demean the person's integrity. It's just terrible. And many of the people who attended the January 6th rally, all they wanted to do was to voice their disgust about an election that they believed was suspicious and questionable. After all, Americans watched as ordinary citizens and election workers testify during local and state hearings, documenting numerous allegations of election fraud. Many of them even signed sworn affidavits. And when it was time for justice to be served, the judges, right up to the Supreme Court, refused to hear the cases, not for lack of evidence, but for lack of legal standing, which further fueled their frustration. We watched as the integrity of our election was further brought into question with outdated voter rolls, ballot harvesting, unsolicited mail-in ballots, and signature verification, with lack of signature verification. But many questions still remain a year later. Did President Trump request 10 to 20,000 National Guard troops to be present prior to January 6th or prior to that day? Can we see evidence of that request? Did the request make it to Nancy Pelosi's office? And if so, did she deny the request? Why was there a video of Capitol Police allowing protesters into the building? And why hasn't all the security video been released yet? There's so many questions that still remain. But it is in our firm and best interest that we Americans have the right to know about what happened that day. And so it is my goal to be able to help in any way I can to bring guests onto JRA Loudspeaker to comment on the situation. But for now, I'd like to introduce fellow co-founder Mitch Silberman. Mitch, take it away.
Hello, JRA community. It is always so great when we are together. You know, sometimes you have to look at what doesn't work first to see what does work. And what doesn't work to make a country great has been on painstaking display these last almost 12 months. You know, on a prior broadcast, I asked, if your goal was to destroy America, tell me what on earth you would do any differently than what this administration has been doing for almost 12 months now. My goodness, it's like watching a toddler with a loaded weapon. We are living through some of the most biggest painful I told you so in American history. So we see what doesn't work right before our very eyes. So what does work? Well, how about this? How about energy independence, a secured southern border? How about the most robust economy the world has ever seen? Steadfast support for Israel, the military, police. Okay, I could go on and on. If only we had a president that would do such. Oh, wait a minute, we did. And what a glorious 4 years it was. And the contrast to what that great president did those 4 years to what this schmagegi is doing right now is mind-blowing. And I'll tell you what, don't you often want to ask a friend of yours that voted for Biden and you want to say, hey, are you sorry for your vote? Do you regret your vote? Another part of me says, I don't want to ask, because if they give me the wrong answer, I feel like my head's going to explode. I mean, it is just remarkable. So we see a long list of things that don't work to make a country great. And another thing that doesn't make a country great, something that was under the radar, something I really never thought much about until I started listening to Barak Lurie every Sunday morning at 10 a.m. and you should too. And he brought up this thing that really got me thinking, and it's atheism. And you say, atheism, aren't there good atheists? Of course there are good atheists out there. But the question is, not does atheism, are there good or bad atheists? The question is, does atheism kill? Does atheism destroy? So glad you asked, because we have today the author of 2 such books. Now, on an individual level, it's not that big of a deal. So we go back to what doesn't work. Well, what doesn't work? What happens if you take God out of society? Well, I'm glad you asked. Have a look at this. Now I'm going to go over this real quickly with you. In 1962, prayer was removed from schools. How are things since then? And you'll see there's 5 charts. The first 4 have, you know, a slanted upward slope to the right, and the bottom one on the right is downward. What are they? Since 1962, since prayer was removed from schools, violent crime going through the roof, single parent household shooting up, premarital sex also on the rise. Birth rates for unwed, underage girls shooting up. And sadly, the only one that's going down are SAT scores. So we know it doesn't work. And what does work is a God-based society. How do we know that? Well, the founders in their infinite wisdom realized that we had to have God, Judeo-Christian principles as part of our society. We see proof of what happens when you take it out. You know, I believe we're all born with a God-shaped hole in us. And as the old saying goes, if you don't believe in God, it's not that you believe in nothing, it's that you believe in anything. And real quick, I'll share a personal story. When I was in college and I would meet fellow college students, if religion came up at all, it was kind of easy. Well, I'm Jewish, what are you? Well, I'm Christian, I'm Catholic. But then there was on not 1, not 2, but 3 separate occasions with students that didn't know each other, separate occasions, where I asked, you know, what are you? And let me tell you what they didn't say. They didn't say, well, I'm not really religious, or I'm agnostic, or I'm atheist. You know what they said? They said 2 words that startled me, so much so that I remember them 4 decades later. These are the 2 words they said to me: I'm nothing. I'm nothing. What a harsh thing to say about yourself. What a harsh thing to say out loud. I'm nothing. So at the individual level, there's pros and cons of atheism, maybe. But as a movement, at a societal level, dare I say as a religion, does atheism kill? Does atheism destroy? Well, we're going to talk to the expert about that right now. So I'm going to introduce our guest today, Barak Lurie. He is the managing partner of the firm LURIE Kramer in Los Angeles, and as I mentioned earlier, the host of the Barak Lurie Show, Sunday mornings on 8:70 a.m. KRLA Los Angeles. He authored Atheism Kills, an instant #1 bestseller about the dangers of godlessness. His second book, Rise of the Sex Machines, about how godlessness is destroying relationships, also became a #1 bestseller. He's recently published his latest bestseller, Atheism Destroys, Volume 2, in his Atheism Kills series. Barak's unique approach is about how godlessness destroys the pillars of civilization, such as justice, country, marriage, free speech, and family. He is a passionate advocate for Judeo-Christian civilization and has served on numerous boards, most notably PragerU and Stand With Us. Welcome, Barak.
Wow, thank you very much, Mitch. I really appreciate that. Thank you, Bruce, as well. And thank you, JRA, for all the great work that you guys do. It's so important to get us all together and to understand the beauty of Judaism and conservatism together. This is the main mission of JRA and why I fell in love with this organization. And I'm so honored to be, I think, one of the most invited guests to your great organization. I feel like Steve Martin did when he was the fifth time at Saturday Night Live. I'm waiting for my bathrobe. Okay, that's funny. I'm insisting on that. So listen, thank you very much for this. Yeah, atheism is truly a destructive force. It is something that I have has been a passion of mine and has what's the word I'm looking for? Been programmed within me for literally decades. I just can't stop thinking about the dangers of atheism. And I think part of the reason why is that I was an atheist myself. I know the mindset of an atheist, and I know how destructive it is. As you've heard me say before, when I was an atheist, I used to say, I'm an atheist, but thank God so few other people are. Because I know it's going to destroy the planet. It's a civilization at the very least. So we worry about global warming. No, we got to worry about godlessness. That's it. Let me start off with a kind of a fun little joke. This couple was taking, they were on golf, and the wife takes a swing, and the ball hits a nearby house, and it shatters through a window, and they feel terrible about it, but they feel responsible. So they go to the house, knock on the door, and they, they're about to say, look, we feel sorry, whatever we've done, we'll pay for the window and anything else that it might have damaged. And to their surprise, they open the door, and the man opens the door, and he's in a beautiful gown, very lavish, and he speaks very eloquently. And he says, I want to thank you. And the couple looks at each other and says, why are you thanking me? You have released me from the lamp that I have been imprisoned in for centuries. And now, because of your golf ball, I am now released. And because of this, I get to grant you each one glorious wish. And in exchange, I ask that you grant me my wish in exchange. And the couple looks at each other and says, wow, this is awesome. And he turns to the husband and he says, you, sir, what is your greatest wish? And he says, well, that's easy. $1 trillion in my bank account, presto pronto, right now. And the genie does this, closes his eyes, breathes deeply, and says, it is done. And of course, the couple is thrilled. And then he turns to the wife and says, and you, ma'am, what is your most desired wish? And she says, oh, gosh, you know how I love traveling. It'd be great if we had a beautiful home in every country in the world, so we would always have a place to stay. And the genie, again, clasps hands, closes his eyes, breathes in deeply, and says, it is done. And they are so excited. And then the genie says, and now it is time for you to grant me my wish. What is that? And he says, as you know, I have been trapped inside this lamp for centuries. And I have not known the pleasures of the flesh of a woman. If you would grant me this one wish, great things will happen, and you will be able to ensure your wishes as well. And at first, the husband and the wife are a little bit cautious about this. They don't like, I mean, sure, he's a good looking guy and everything, but still, you know. And finally, the wife says, you know, honey, he did give you $1 trillion to your bank account. I think for what, 15, 20 minutes, we'll be okay. And he did give us those houses. And very reluctantly, but, you know, he nods his head. He says, okay, that's fine. And so the genie and the wife now go up to the upper floor, to the bedroom. And meanwhile, of course, the husband stays below. And there's wild lovemaking in the process. And after 20 minutes, they're done and they're relaxing. And the genie turns to the wife and says, tell me, ma'am, how old is your husband? And she says, well, he's 38. And the genie says to her, he's 38 and he still believes in genies.
That's
So
good.
I bring this up because, you know, when we look at it, it's a turnabout, right? It's about believing in preposterous things. But sometimes we believe in things because they are preposterous. I mean, or rather, notwithstanding how preposterous they are, we still believe them. And we live in that time, don't we? We live in a time where people are told that they're vaccinated, but they still can spread the COVID virus or get the COVID virus or even die from the COVID virus, but somehow it's okay. We learn about the 15 days to flatten the curve, which of course is still, you know, it's a long 15 days in my opinion. We learn about the insurrection that Mitch and Bruce just talked about. We learn about somehow the Russia hoax was a real hoax. It was not a hoax, but we have to believe it, and surely it's that way. We're to believe that man is affecting the climate, for example, and many other preposterous things. And yet we have to ask, why is that the case? And I forget whether it was Mitch or Bruce who just mentioned it, that when you don't believe in God, you don't believe in nothing, you will believe in anything. And so we are seeing that manifest today. Now, one of the things, as you know, that I've always talked about is how about, I always want to refute that mantra that you hear that religion has been responsible for more deaths and murder and mayhem than anything else. Well, it's a quip that I believed in myself when I became an atheist, but now I realize that it's completely the opposite. There's nothing more destructive than atheism, the lack of God. In fact, if anything, it was because religion was out there that we were able to withstand so many murders and such mayhem and torture and rape and all the brutality that you can imagine. I often like to think of that movie, It's a Wonderful Life. It's one of my favorite films of all time with, who is it? Jimmy Stewart, right? Playing George Bailey. And most of you should know this movie, but briefly, it's about a man he's down in the dumps and he begins to believe that the world would be better without him. And he wished he had never been born. And then of course, Clarence the angel comes down and shows him the world as it would have been without him. And then he quickly sees that many people would have not lived. Life would have been much more miserable without his great presence and his contributions to society. And therefore, he should enjoy it. And at the end of the day, at the end of the movie, he runs around saying, Merry Christmas to everyone. It's a beautiful story. I often think, what if we just changed that a little bit, in fact, a lot, and said that instead of missing George Bailey, that we would miss God. If there were no God, maybe we'd call the movie It's a Wonderful Civilization, right? All the things that would happen. You don't want God? Let's see what happens. All right. So to any, classic atheist, Sam Harris or Christopher Hitchens, any of those bad boys, I would like to see that. Anyway, let me tell you a little.
We have several questions for you, Barak, if that's okay.
Sure, absolutely. Can we wait till the end, or do we want to wait to now, or do it now?
We have questions now for you, and we wanted to have a discussion with you on various, if that's okay with you.
Sure, absolutely. Whatever you like. It's your
great.
floor.
Okay. Well, this, ladies and gentlemen, I have to say is a great book. I have it here called Atheism Kills. I happen to have the autographed version, which I love. But there's a quote in there from Barak that he says in the book, atheism never elevates. It never creates. Atheism diminishes all that makes us human. It takes away all purpose and all that has allowed us to pursue civilization in the first place, among them beauty, justice, free will, and freedom itself. I thought that was a great quote from your book. So my question is, how has the removal of God from our culture led to a country of lawlessness, selfishness, and decline?
Yes, it is ultimately what has to be. I always say, or make that analogy of God being like the sun in the middle of our solar system. If you take the sun out of the solar system, the planets will soon enough just float away. And to expect them to stay in their orbit is naive and silly, and of course, physically impossible. So we will inevitably see this decay in civilization when there is no God. Look, in the same way that we just saw what happens when we do not enforce the criminal laws, and then we expected people to still have a civilization where peace and law and order are still intact. Look how quickly things descended in the smash and grab culture that we now have. Look how quickly we have the homelessness problem arising and perpetuating itself. It's a vicious, vicious place now in many of the cities that are Democrat controlled. And that's because of the sudden decision not to enforce the laws and to not, of course, prosecute crimes when police actually bring people in after having arrested them. So it's the same thing when it comes to the lack of God and our belief in God. People will eventually figure out that things just don't matter. What things don't matter, you ask? Good question. Marriage, relationships, free speech, and courage. Those are the things I focus on in this new book, Atheism Destroys. But also it destroys the whole nature of sex and relationships, generally speaking. People just will not connect with each other in the same way that they used to. People will not have a feeling of obligation, let alone a societal obligation. So we don't realize how much God is in the mother's milk, whether or not you are a believer yourself. You need to understand, as I did at least, I'll give myself credit, that even if you're an atheist, you need to appreciate that the church, synagogue, God generally speaking, has given so much to civilization. In fact, has been the reason why we have a civilization in the first place. I hope that answers the question.
Great.
Thank you, Barak.
Barak, I want to delve a little deeper into something you said, because this is, to me, is a very key point. I love when you say you can out atheist the atheist, because you were one. But this is something that I really would love you to delve into. You said that earlier in your opening speech that even though you were an atheist, you felt very happy that not everyone else was, or thank goodness not everyone else is an atheist.
Right.
But you're a very thoughtful person. Do you really think at the root of people who are convinced, they're atheists, that they deep down or even unknowingly agree, like, well, I'm so happy that I'm an atheist, I'm comfortable with that, but I'm so grateful not everyone else is? Do you really think that they believe that too?
No, they don't believe it. There is a division, and I talk about this in my new book, Atheism Destroys, that there is the old atheists, and I would consider myself a former member of that, and the new atheists. The new atheists are a clan that has arisen in the early 2000s with Sam Harris and Christopher Hitchens and the others, who decided that atheism was not only a correct way of looking at the universe, that there was no God, but also that it is morally superior, that it is a far better system by which we should all live. In other words, the government, all government systems should banish God one way or the other, and we should live this much more noble and utopian vision of a godless society, and then we will really get things going off the ground. So that is the difference. So to answer your question, no, I think most atheists really don't understand this. But the reason why they're not, how shall I say this? The reason why these atheists are atheists is not for the same reason that I was an atheist. I was an atheist in the past because I believed that there was no evidence of a God, and therefore, because I could not see, smell, hear, or touch him, very obviously, then there was no God. That was my thinking at the time, and I thought everyone else who believed in God was being silly and not empirical enough. These guys, the reason why they're atheists has nothing to do with that. The reason why they are atheists and why they cling on to atheism so much is because it lets them not be accountable. It is a drug. It is a wonderful thing in their minds to be able to not be responsible for family, for having children, for relationships, generally speaking. They can sex it up. They can gamble it up. They can commit crimes. They can lie, they can cheat, they can gossip. They can do all these things and not really worry about being responsible or accountable for any of them. That is very, very appealing to the atheist of today. And when you speak to an atheist of today, watch how quickly he will dismiss what you have to say. Just watch. When you start saying about, well, what about morality and such, they'll just wave you off, literally with their hand, dismiss you, and say, whatever you believe is nonsensical. And they'll be angry with you for presenting them with the notion that there is one God with one demand of a moral structure. They're angry with you. And to wrap up my answer to your question, I know this because of two things. And Dennis Prager and I talk about this all the time. The most vicious responses he's ever gotten, and that I've gotten, but that's, I'm Mr. Anti-Atheist, right? So it's very consistent in my life. But the most vicious responses he ever gets is when he brings up the subject of God. Even amongst some conservatives, they will lambast him and they will lambast me. I've never seen such horrific words thrown at me when I say that we need God. Simply as that. It is a very bizarre response. And you can see that in my YouTube channel, the comments that are there. You can see it in the reviews to Atheism Kills, and you'll soon see it soon enough in the reviews to Atheism Destroys. It's very strange, but what you're really hearing there are people who do not want to hear your message, and they want to shout it down, because the last thing they want to hear is that maybe that there is a God and that there's somebody who will hold them accountable. They don't want that.
That is very true, Barak. My daughter, Alexandra, wrote a paper for her philosophy class. It was called The Case for Ethical Monotheism. And it was a great paper. And a couple of things that she wrote in there I took. It says, if there are different sources of morality, who is to say which source of morality is correct? And without a single source of one standard of morality, all good and evil is just subjective. Have we got to a place in America where part of our division is that good and evil and right and wrong are all just subjective now because there's no one source of morality?
Well, I think that the one source that everyone seems to agree on is that Donald Trump is evil. So that's good. I mean, they have that sense, right? But that's it. I mean, it's ironic. It's hypocritical. It's all inconsistent. The only thing that they believe is, absolutely consistent is that conservatives are bad. Anybody who believes in God is bad. And of course, Donald Trump is bad, and all the leaders of the Republican Party. So yes, everything is floating point morality, to use your words. You will have noticed that all the phrases that we've used in the past to reflect judgment of any kind have been wiped out. So for example, when was the last time you heard any woman, and I'm not saying this is a good thing, I'm just saying anyone referring to another woman as a slut or a man as a player, for example? Those words are not in the lexicon anymore because a woman can go around, sleep around, and nobody will call her a slut. I'm not saying that's a good word. I'm simply saying it's not in the parlance to even throw out as a weapon of gossip. Likewise with a player. No one will be upset about that. And that's a reflection of how we are we're stripping away any sort of judgment associated with certain words and certain actions. Same thing with stealing. We hear people now talking about how it's okay to steal. Certainly if it's less than $1,000, right? Then it's no longer a crime. And then there's talk of somehow that this is for reparations. Everything is now, all the values and the judgments seem to be thrown away. And there's a reason for that, because if there is no God, there is no morality, there is no good and evil. You may want morality. You may claim to love morality for that matter, but that's only because there's an echo of the past that tells you that morality is somehow important. You seem to understand it, but you want to have it both ways. You want to have morality, but without God. I don't know. It's like saying I want to have consequence-free sex. I want to have consequence-free money. I want to have consequence-free exercise. I mean, that you don't have to work for it. Nothing needs to be worked for. So this is what they want. They want it all without any of the burdens that go along with it.
Barak, the last question I asked you, you really, gosh, you make me think in such a great way. And you were saying how atheists, well, I love the distinction between old atheists and new atheists, but you talk about how they literally will wave you off and attack you and dismiss you. And the first thing that came to my mind, well, that's a leftist. And then I'm like, well, wait a minute. You're talking about atheists that do that. And what I heard you describe as a leftist, but then I think of the current Pope. Now, I know you're a fan of the Catholic Church. You just said so on last week's show. But this guy, to me, is a leftist first and a devout Catholic second. So how do you balance that with people who are really religious, yet they have these leftist notions that they share with atheists?
Right. It is very strange. First of all, I love the Catholic Church. I think we should all appreciate the Catholic Church. I think we should appreciate Protestantism as well, and Judaism. Every one of them have contributed amazingly to civilization, without which we just wouldn't have the civilization we enjoy today. But that doesn't mean that I love every part of the Catholic Church, no more than I love every single Jew or every single Protestant. There are many people that have morphed or disfigured their respective religions. Now, this Pope, to me, is very much of a leftist. I think that he's really bringing Catholicism a very bad name, and he's turning it into a direction that I just can't understand how he thinks that Catholicism can survive if the next Pope continues in his legacy. So that's a big problem. Your other question is generally about the notion of atheists being moral or otherwise, or identifying with atheism. This is a big problem. This is something that even Dennis Prager and I actually disagree about, because he believes that there's some atheists who are moral. My difference with that is that yes, there are some atheists who act morally, but in spite of their atheism, not because of their atheism. It's just what I said before, is that they want morals. They want the notion of the rule of law, for example. They want the notion of respecting everyone. They want the notion of marriage and commitment and thinking for the future and respecting the past. But they don't want the burden of working for God and understanding that they are accountable. That's a very big difference. So yes, atheists may act morally, but again, it's in spite of their atheism. They are, you might as well say, and we've met many of these people, right? I remember in law school, there was a couple of people where communism was still fashionable during the 80s. And, they proudly proclaimed themselves to be communists. And they believed in communism. Okay, they were nice people, but let's admit it, the communism is a horrific ideology. And it led to the killings of millions and millions of people. So that's its exact analogy. Atheists may not believe in God, that's fine, but their ideology is horrific and highly destructive.
I think that's very true, Barak. We have a question from William K. In our audience, and he says, do you agree with President Trump that evangelical Christians are more supportive of Israel than many Jews?
Well, yes, I mean, for sure. First of all, let's keep in mind that there are many more evangelical Christians than there are Jews altogether. So total number of Jews on the planet is 14 million. So it's, I mean, we're a tiny fraction of the world population. And I believe we're only slightly more than 2% of America's population. So just by sheer numbers, that would make sense. Secondly, in the ideology of a lot of the evangelicals, that is their mission. Israel is a very big part of their belief. They believe, and correctly, I think, that those who curse Israel will be cursed, those who bless Israel will be blessed. So that's great. And they understand that. I think a lot of Jews, by contrast, I mean, you and I were conservative Jews, not just religiously, but also politically. We understand it. We think that conservatism, and I think we think correctly, that conservatism and Judaism go hand in hand. They are one and the same. And that the classic liberal Jews and the leftist Jews who somehow think that tikkun olam means social justice and reparations and transgenderism and climate change reform, they've gotten it all ass backwards, as they say. So that is true. Evangelicals, there are more of them supporting them, but just by sheer numbers. One last thing I'll say in response to that is this, and it's a very important distinction that we Jews need to make. When a Christian tells you that he's a Christian, that means, and you can take this to the bank, that he believes that Jesus was his savior, that he died for your sins, and that he rose from the dead. Okay? That is common to, I believe, all Christians, whether they're Christian or Catholic or Jehovah's Witnesses or Mormons. That is consistent. When a Jew tells you he's a Jew, by contrast, as we all know, that can mean anything, right? You can be an atheist and still call yourself a Jew. So it's hard. You can't really compare apples to apples in the Jewish world. It is true that Jews have voted overwhelmingly as a group for liberals. I think it was 75%, which was actually a low watermark for the Jews in the past election. But all the same, you could point to the Jews and say, well, that's a very liberal group. But if you actually parse it out and look at only those Jews that believe fervently in God in the same level that Christian evangelicals do, you'll see 99% of those Jews voting conservative.
True. I'm gonna continue with this. This William K has another amazing question. This is really good. God hardened Pharaoh's heart to set up the Exodus. Is it possible, Barak, that God is permitting atheism to let it take its evil course?
Yes, that's something I worry about all the time. Like, I forget the questioner's name, but I so resonate with you for that question, because my thinking is, like, do we really have to go through this process? Can we be on the other side of this process, pretty please? Like, I feel like I don't want to be part of those Jews that had to suffer through the Inquisition and through all the horrific times of the pogroms and such in order to get to the other side where we have the birth of Israel, the modern day Israel, and so forth. So maybe it is so that we have to go through atheism in order to see the horrors of atheism before we ourselves appreciate that we need God back in the picture, that this is a very important part of it. So, I just don't know if people will wake up to it. There is a renaissance that's coming. I do think that more people are beginning to understand the need for God, but it's such a shame that it has to come to this before we realize that God was necessary in the first place. Look, if I could say something about all this stuff, we are realizing it. All of us are scratching our heads about so many of the things, right? The transgender nonsense, the response to COVID, the climate change nonsense, and I really mean that descriptively. That using that word nonsense, it is nonsensical. I cannot understand how people can literally believe this nonsense, and how that there's the nonsense that there's no God somehow. You simply cannot meaningfully believe that there's no God if you actually bring yourself to it. There's a new phenomenon, and I don't like the name associated with it, but there it is. It's called mass formation. And if you don't know what that is among our listeners here, the notion is that it's a psychosis. It's emblematic now in the COVID response. It explains why people look at masking up and vaccinating with such fervor. You scratch your head and you say, well, why are you putting a mask on while you're driving alone in your car? Why are you wearing a mask when you're alone outside mountain biking, let's say? What is it with you? You can't possibly believe that this makes sense. And the reason why is because, going back to the comment of, you don't believe in nothing, if you don't believe in God, you don't believe in nothing, you believe in anything. People have to gravitate to something that gives them a sense of purpose, that'll give them meaning, that they are fixing the world somehow, that this has given them a cause beyond simply stopping the spread of the virus, because they can't really believe that anymore. They believe they're doing something that's so noble and so wonderful, and they are changing the world together with other people. They need purpose. We all need purpose, but without God, you have to search for it in some other way. And this is what's happening. This is what COVID is providing. And that's why when you tell people, and this is why I predicted a long time ago, people want the mask. They love the mask. There's something weird about these people. The whole response doesn't make sense. And you can argue with them all the day. And you scratch your head because it doesn't make sense, but they give you the same response that an atheist will give you when you try to explain that there is a God and that there is accountability. They will dismiss you. They will wave you off. And the reason why they will wave you off on the mask mandates and the vaccines and everything else is because to them, it's as if you're asking them to take away their very purpose. That's why. That is why we are seeing this mass formation psychosis. It is a new culture, and they're surrounding themselves around this COVID response, and that's what gives them meaning. If we understand that, then we understand why they are reacting in the way they are reacting, and it is because of godlessness, pure and simple.
That's probably why Joe Biden wore a mask on a Zoom call.
Yes, exactly right. Exactly right. Yeah, people are very, it's interesting about Joe Biden, the same sort of thing. You try to explain to him why Joe Biden is even president and why he's doing such a poor job. And people will dismiss you on that as well, because the cult of hating Trump is so strong that they don't want to dismiss, they want to dismiss you from arguing that somehow Trump did a better job than Biden is doing now. Exactly the same thing. But gentlemen, can I talk a little bit about some of the other things that godlessness destroys, because it's so important. I mentioned before about family and relationships. I've talked about that at length in Rise of the Sex Machines, and there's a lot of that also in Atheism Destroys. This past year and also 2020, we saw what I perceive to be the destruction of courage itself. Courage is a God value. There can be no courage without God. And why would there be courage? Think about it, right? Why would you die for your country? Why would you die for your family or your faith if you believe that we are random carbon units that have no past and no future? Why? Why would you die? Wouldn't you, in fact, guard your life as much as possible so that you can have as much sex and pursue as much vacation and pursue as much money and steal as much as, for that matter? Why would you have any sense of something nobler than you, something above you? So we saw that, didn't we, in 2020 and 2021? Suddenly, and I wrote an article about this in Town Hall. I noted the difference between World War II, the American public in World War II, and the American public in 2020. In World War II, we sacrificed lives for the sake of civilization. In 2020 and beyond, we sacrifice civilization for the sake of lives. Exactly the opposite. There's no courage today. And you'll see it. And Dennis and I talk about this all the time, and we are very much on, it's a big disappointment, isn't it? I mean, I know you, Bruce and Mitch, are very disappointed about the way we Americans have responded to this COVID stuff. We thought, okay, well, people are just not gonna respond to this. They're gonna push back on this. They're gonna say, I want my hair salon to open. I want my restaurant to open, and so forth. But no, people caved in, partly because of this mass formation hysteria, yes, but also because they just lack courage. And I put it to you that in a far more God-full era, let's say back in the 80s or even the 70s and 60s, you would see a lot more pushback. But because we're in 2021, I believe we've gone to the amount of religion and religious observance is now so much below 50% that we've got a majority of people thinking that all that matters is protecting your life, and all that matters is doing whatever the government tells you to do. So that's a collapse of courage. Last thing I want to kind of emphasize, there are a lot of other things that are in the book, of course, but the lack of free speech, the destruction of free speech. And how can I say this? That godlessness kills free speech? Really, Barak? Are you going there? You're going to say this? Yes, I'll connect the dots for you. Free speech. You have to wonder why do we have free speech in the first place? What's so important about free speech? I mean, after all, if I want to, okay, free speech, you want to complain about, your government going too far, sure, okay, I get that. But why is it so sacrosanct? Why is it the First Amendment? Why do we make such a big deal of that, right? It doesn't really matter. I mean, there are other democracies, Australia, for example, Canada, England, Japan, Israel even, that have laws that say that you have the right to free speech, but you actually delve into it, it's more of a privilege than it is a right. And we think about free speech today, and somehow when you come to America, the first thing an immigrant will say is, not only do they think of America as the land of liberty, but the land of free speech, even if they're coming from another democracy. And you have to wonder why. I mean, they pay lip service to free speech, but they don't really give free speech. They will shut you down if the government perceives you to be disruptive of law and order, or otherwise challenging the status quo. So how can you call that free speech? I mean, it's a little bit like the laws about driving. Yes, you can drive whenever and wherever you like, sir, but you have to stay on the right side of the road, obey the stoplights and all the other traffic signs, do all those things, and then you can drive. But that's the way they view free speech. You can say all these things so long as you say it within those confines. Not so in America. And why is that? And I mean, Mitch and Bruce, I welcome you to respond to, but there is an answer. Because there's free speech. You might say, oh, it's in the Constitution, and you'd be right. But free speech is in the Constitution of the EU. It's in the Constitution of the Philippines. It's in the Constitution of South Africa and many others. We are the only constitution, the only one that says free speech among the other rights come from God. That's the reason why. Free speech is sacrosanct. In every other country, free speech is something that they're, willing to tolerate. That's fine. But we can take it away from you anytime. That's why they don't take it so seriously there. So what happens when we take God out of the equation in our civilization, in American society? Well, you see people now being very receptive to refiguring free speech to the way it is in Europe. And there's plenty of articles about how it's necessary in order to save free speech to curb free speech. There's just too much information out there, and disinformation for that matter. And therefore, we need to end free speech as we previously had thought of it, because there are too many important missions to face and to conquer, because free speech is nice and all, but global warming, COVID, we have to deal with these crises that the founding fathers never thought about. That's what's happening. But in a God-full world, we understand that free speech is everything. It is the core. And the most important aspect of free speech, and that's the last thing I'll say about free speech, is to express yourself for the love of God and to pursue God. That's the reason, in my opinion, why the First Amendment is both the freedom to express yourself and also the freedom to express your faith in God. That's why.
That's a beautiful statement, Barak. And free speech is an important issue to me as well. And there's now a legal battle going on between the social media companies, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, who are now such a large part of our society, in some ways, one of the main forms of communication, and their private company power to be able to censor people at will, choosing conservatives to censor most likely. And where does that come out in the public square? Where does the legal battle wind up? Do people retain their rights of free speech, and do these big public companies, do they get their hands slapped, or does it continue to go the other way?
look, it continues, unfortunately, to go the other way. What you're talking about is, of course, a very important issue of the day. The de facto platform now that everyone expresses themselves on is social media, Facebook, Twitter, and so forth. And people can't really meaningfully express themselves in any other way. I mean, you can say they can develop a newspaper, but nobody reads the newspaper anymore. And it's a real challenge. Fortunately, we have the Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, which basically says that if you are a platform merely allowing people to express themselves, then you will enjoy immunity from any liability for defamation. If, however, you're a publisher and you exercise discretion as to what is on your platform, for example, the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, conservative or liberal, doesn't matter, then you are subject to defamation attack if you allow something that's libelous, just say. But so Facebook and Twitter are trying to have it both ways. They're on the one hand trying to say that they can discreetly take away things on the grounds that it's disinformation, and on the other hand say that they can say whatever they want and not have to deal with any defamation laws. So that's the battleground. We're dealing a lot with that with PragerU. As you may know, I was on the board of directors. I was the primary attorney on the matter, overseeing the matter rather. And PragerU and the YouTube lawsuit, that's exactly what we were talking about. It's a fascinating issue, and how the Supreme Court will come down on it is still yet to be seen. We've had some challenges, but it ultimately will go to the Supreme Court. And if they come down and say, look, the social media can do whatever they damn well please because they're private organizations, we've got big trouble. They have to fashion some sort of remedy to change this. Something new has to happen.
Barak, we're blessed with the JRA. We have so many people in our audience that, whether live or on via broadcast, they're so engaged, they're so informed, they're so passionate. And I have no doubt that our viewers are saying, oh, this is incredible, this is brilliant, I wish my kids would hear this, I wish my grandkids would hear this. And what I find is sometimes when you talk to younger people, they would listen to what you have to say and say, so what? Like, why, hate speech shouldn't be protected. And so what if free speech? I mean, they would say, so what to your arguments that to us are so compelling. How do you get through the young mindset of, you don't understand why we have free speech. You don't understand why we have a constitution. You don't understand why we have rights given by our creator. Like, how would you break through to the younger people that just say, I don't understand what's the big deal?
It's a great question. For the younger people, what I do, and I have kids of my own, and I say, I always ask questions. For example, your comment about hate speech. Well, just ask them, what is hate speech? What does that mean? Does that mean anything that you disagree with? Well, what do you think free speech is, right? I mean, free speech is only, in your mind, what am I allowed to say in free speech? Am I allowed to say that I like daffodils? I like butterflies? I think that Mitch and Bruce are nice guys. I mean, is that what I'm allowed to say? Or am I only allowed to say things that you like I hate Trump. I hate the color of his skin. What's hateful? Is it only with regard to groups of people, ethnic groups? I mean, where is that in the Constitution? Just tell me what your vision of free speech is. Do you value free speech? So all these questions, if you ask questions and you propose to them to ask them why things are the way they are. This is the one talent I have. I don't know if I have any other talents, Bruce and Mitch, but I'm constantly asking myself, why are things the way they are? Why do we have free speech? Why do we treasure democracy? Why do we have the checks and balances system that we have? Why anything? Why do we have language, for that matter? Why is there a constitution? Why is there anything? When we start speaking about God, why is there morality? Where does morality come from? These are issues that people, they don't ask questions, and we need to be a more question-oriented society. Let me kind of tell you a story, and this is a story that's also in my book. But it was a very powerful moment in mind. It actually changed me dramatically. I was coming back from San Francisco airport. I took one of those super shuttles back to college. It was winter break, coming back from winter break. And it was late at night. I was the last one on the super shuttle. There was about 20 or so people. And I went to the way back, and I was in the center seat in the way back, you know, and there was a rear view mirror of the driver, and everything was going along fine. But after only about 15 minutes or so during the drive, I saw that the driver, he was nodding his head like this. He was falling asleep. And I saw all the passengers. It was a full super shuttle. I saw all the other passengers talk to each other, wondering, oh my gosh, what do we do? What do we do? And they're whispering like, oh my gosh, are you seeing what's happening? What do we do? What do we do? And I saw myself crashing if I didn't do something. And I saw this, in a split second, I said, F this. And I went through the aisle, went right up to the driver. And I said, hey, buddy, is everything okay? You seem a little tired. Do you want me to take the wheel for you for a while? And he bolted up, of course, it woke him up. And he said, no, I'm fine. And I stayed there, and we just talked the entire ride. I wanted to make sure he was awake. And I wanted him to know that we were concerned about his falling asleep. And the ride went uneventfully as a result. And it was a very powerful moment for me, guys, because I realized that nobody else was doing that. We're important. And isn't it that we are looking now at civilization, that we're looking at all the things around us. We're not asking questions. We're not saying this is wrong. We need to stand up and not be embarrassed that we might be different from everybody else in the super shuttle van, as it were. We need to get out there and speak about the importance of God and not be embarrassed about that. We need to speak about the importance of America, the importance of free speech, and what all these things mean to us. And if you treasure all these things that you claim to treasure, then you have to fight for them. You have to recognize where they came from and how the lack of God will threaten that. In fact, not only threaten it, it will certainly destroy all those things that you claim to love.
Thank you, Barak. I want to thank you for joining us again today. You are certainly welcome anytime and any place that we are at. Just to also let you know, in our chat, we posted the link to Barak's new book, Atheism Destroys. So we recommend you all go out there and pick that up today.
Thanks so much, guys. It was really a pleasure, and love to you all, and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, Barak. Thank you. We'll see you soon. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here today. Wanted to let everybody know we've had a lot of questions about when we're resuming in-person events, and we have a lot of great things planned for 2022 that'll be coming out shortly. We've all been hampered by the COVID situation that has prevented us from doing things, and that's why we've been doing these JRA loudspeaker events. But we have every intention of coming back strong and having some great events for you this year, and some amazing things that we'll be announcing soon. So until we meet again, we wish you all Shabbat Shalom, a great weekend, and we'll see you soon.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone.